Hello everybody, here we are today and we are back doing the Champions Cup series today, talking about the 1930-31 season. So before we start, please make sure to subscribe if you're new to me or hockey, whatever the case may be. That being said, let's get on into it. So in this video today, we're going to be doing a recap over the 1930-31 season. I haven't done one of these videos since July, so I am so excited to get back to these as I'm really passionate about this. It's just been something that with free agency, previews, all that stuff, things got in the way. But we are kicking it off talking about this season. There were some highs and lows. Going into the season, there were some things that weren't so positive. The fact that the Great Depression was really starting to make an impact in the league, starting to put a lot of financial pressure on these teams is big, because we think of these teams as, you know, big, super successful organizations now. And we saw not too long ago, just a couple of seasons ago, they felt a really big financial impact from people not being allowed to go to games. Just imagine the Great Depression happening when the league was still, you know, relatively young. So that was unfortunate, and with it, we would see the Pittsburgh Pirates, the hockey team, not baseball team, have to relocate. After a few seasons being in Pittsburgh, they would become the Philadelphia Quakers. So there's that. The Ottawa Senators were a side that saw a lot of success in the 1920s. Unfortunately, we're starting to feel that financial pressure as well, but they were able to work through it and get to play the season, so that is good there. And this would be a season that had some positives as well. Again, there was the standard 44-game schedule that was the norm, so I guess being even able to play the same amount of games was a good thing, as you would have the Great Depression, you know, could have affected it, especially at the start of all this. However, they were able to play the normal schedule, and there were some other things that were a little bit more lighthearted or funny, I guess, if you want to call it that. One of those being the Detroit Cougars would become the Detroit Falcons. I might have flipped that, but I do think I'm correct there. This essentially one day leads to them becoming the Red Wings, but right now they switched names, so there's that. And then for one of the funniest things, I think, from all this, Art Ross, the Boston Bruins head coach, yes, the Art Ross, lost to the Montreal Canadiens in a best-of-3 Stanley Cup series last season, so the 1929-30 season. Basically complained so much to the league that they said, you know what, we're going to make it a 5-game series. So I just kind of found it funny that a coach would be able to complain so much that he was able to get the series length changed, and now just imagine a head coach doing that to the league. They just say be quiet, whereas this case it actually worked out for the Bruins, and now we get to go into the standings. So I'm going to put the standings up on here on the screen. So in the Canadian division, the Canadians take the top seed from the Maroons, as the Maroons would make the playoffs yet again but fall to third, and the Leafs get second after missing the playoffs the season prior. The New York Americans finish fourth, and for the first time in Ottawa's history, the 14 seasons, including this one in the NHL, they finished dead last. And if I read something correctly, it was the first time they finished dead last in any division that they were in since 1898. As for the American division, the Boston Bruins take the top spot for the 4th straight season, and the rest of the division stays the same, with Chicago and New York taking second and third, with the new name Falcons and the new name Quakers also being at the bottom of the division, as you would see the new city, Philadelphia side, obviously not benefit from going to a different city, and of course Detroit out of playoff hockey as well. As for the league's top scorer, it was Howie Morans. He would have 33 goals, 18 assists for 51 points in 44 games played. He would be able to top the league in points for the second time in his career, I believe, up to this point, and this would be the second Hart Trophy that he would win with the Montreal Canadiens, so very cool there for him in the half. As for the Vezina, it would be Roy Werters of the New York Americans, as he would go 18, 16, and 10 with a 1.61 goals against average and had 8 shutouts on the season. Winning that would be kind of cool, especially for a guy that won the Hart in 1929. However, a little bit frustrating to be able to win the Vezina and see his side still not be able to make it to the playoffs. As for the playoffs, they would remain the same, as you would see the Montreal Canadiens and Boston Bruins being the top seeds in their division go on to get a bye in the first round and make it to the semifinals. And in the first round, you would see the Maroons take on the Rangers and the Blackhawks take on the Maple Leafs. So in the first round, things would again be kind of weird, as the NHL kind of fidgeted around with the playoff format multiple times early in their history. So in this one, it would be a 2-game total goal series. So in the first game of the Maroons-Rangers series, you would see the Rangers win a 5-1, so they have a 5-1 total goal lead. And then in the second game, New York would win that other one 3-0, so they would advance on to the semifinals, where they won 8-1 over the Maroons. Not really ideal to be able to be outscored 8-1 in those 2 games, but nonetheless, that's how the playoffs were done back then in the first round. So then for the Chicago-Toronto series, you would see it be 2-2. Yes, it finished with a tie in the first game, so series tied 2-2 in total goals. But Chicago in overtime would beat the Maple Leafs to win this series in total goals 4-3, as they would advance to the semifinals, where they would take on the Rangers. Now, this is kind of weird because you're saying, why would the top two teams, Boston and Montreal, play each other? For whatever reason, the NHL decided at one point during all this to have the top two teams from each division play each other in the semifinals. You could argue probably the Stanley Cup Final matchup is being played there. Nonetheless, they didn't care back then, as it would be Montreal, the Canadiens, taking on the Boston Bruins. So the 1-1 taking on each other, whereas Chicago and New York would get a chance to play each other in the semifinals for a chance to advance to either play Boston or Montreal. So in the semifinals between the Rangers and the Hawks, things get kind of messy, as again the NHL tried to mess with their format a little bit. So they would have the winner of this be a 2-game total goal series, or total goal winner, where they kind of played with it multiple times, where sometimes it would be, you had to win 2 out of 3, but other years it would be where you had to have the total goal lead. So first game, Chicago wins 2-0, so they lead 2-0 going into game 2. Pivotal here for the Rangers to try to flip it and then end up getting more goals, not only than Chicago in this game, but they need to make up that 2-goal deficit from the first game. Unfortunately for them, they would get shut out again. Chicago would win 1-0 and punch their ticket to the Stanley Cup Final, as they win the total goal series 3-0. As for the 1-seed clash between the Bruins and the Canadiens, a Stanley Cup Final rematch from previous season, mind you, it would be a 5-game series. So Artur Ross not getting to benefit from a early series win if things happen here, and he kind of gets that whole, I get to play them 5 games, even though it's not in the Stanley Cup Final. So we'll see if he puts his money where his mouth is, as the first game, the Bruins would win 5-4 in overtime and take a 1-0 series lead. Game 2 would see the Canadiens bounce back as they win 1-0 and tie the series up. And then in Game 3, it would be 4-3 Montreal now, as they take a 2-1 series lead. They just need to win one more game to advance to the Stanley Cup Final. But the Bruins aren't done yet, as they win Game 4 3-1 and tie the series up, push it to the full 5 games, and it would be the Montreal Canadiens in Game 5 that would win 3-2 in overtime. They advanced to the Stanley Cup Final, and Artur Ross had to be fuming after making a big fuss about the whole 5-game series last year, thinking, okay, well, if I play them in a 5-game series the next season, we got it done. In fact, it's not the case, as Montreal would play the Chicago Blackhawks in the first ever matchup between these two in the Stanley Cup Final. So in Game 1, the Montreal Canadiens would win this one 2-1 to take a 1-0 series lead. Game 2, the Chicago Blackhawks, playing the underdogs here, would play and win 2-1 in overtime to tie the series up. Game 3 would see the Chicago Blackhawks take the victory 3-2 in overtime, and had the series not been changed after Artur Ross made a fit the season prior, they would be taking home the trophy right then and there after Game 3. But guess what? They have to win one more game to try to take this championship and win and beat the defending Stanley Cup champions from the season prior, Montreal. But the Habs say, no, we're going to have a 5-game series, as we end up winning 4-2 in Game 4 to make it 2-all, and then going into Game 5, winner takes all, as the Habs are looking to go back-to-back. They do just that, shutting out the Hawks, winning 2-0. So for the first time in NHL history for the Montreal Canadiens, they are back-to-back Stanley Cup champions, winning in 1930 and 1931. After Artur Ross made a big deal about the season prior, they said, you know what, we're going to take care of business and win a full Game 5 series. However, at the same time, things, while looking rosy for the Habs, did not look so rosy elsewhere around the league. For starters, the Ottawa Senators, a team that was already facing financial pressure going into the season, actually had to take the season after this one off to try to recoup and deal with some of the issues they were trying to get in order to have enough money. And this was something that had to be crushing. We think of this as NHL fans of our teams today and think, oh, that's ancient history, to see this stuff that is, literally almost 100 years old. But if you were an Ottawa fan back in the day, you could only imagine how heartbroken you would be knowing your team that was the creme de la creme, the top of the top in the 20s multiple times, was on the verge of really not being able to play anymore in the NHL, and realizing that Ottawa history and hockey could be done, As for the other team, the Philadelphia Quakers, bad news as they would never play again after this season, meaning that after moving from Pittsburgh and then moving to Philadelphia just after one season, their time in the NHL was done. With the extinction of the Quakers franchise, the state of Pennsylvania would have to wait a bit longer for professional hockey to come back in the NHL form, as it would be 38 years before Pittsburgh would see their team, the Penguins, come around, and then for the city of Philadelphia, with the Quakers being done, it would be 37 years with the expansion draft of 68, or the expansion of the league going into 68, might have been 67, excuse me, that they would see the Flyers be born, and both of these teams would be able to win Stanley Cups for their cities. However, it just kind of goes to show that it took nearly 40 years after all this to get them those teams. So for Montreal, things looking good. For other teams, you can see where things looked really bad, if not the worst possible. But yeah, this is just a recap of the 1930-31 season. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it. I'm going to try to get back to making a couple of these. Unfortunately, they take a bit of research because things kind of seem to be muddled, and there's not a lot of great answers about why the league decided to do what they did with some of the rule changes. But it is what it is, and I enjoy doing these. So hopefully you liked this video. If you enjoyed it, subscribe if you're new. Everybody stay safe. Have a great night. You go off hockey, all right. Goodbye, Brigadiers and Brigadettes. This is your captain signing off. Have a great night.